You've underestimated everything I've been through. I think you can't imagine all the things that I can do. Watch this.
Hello everyone. In today's episode, we're going to make cake. Well, more accurately, for the purposes of the video, I will be making two cakes. A French vanilla with a buttercream frosting, as well as a devil's food cake with a milk chocolate frosting. The process for these is mostly the same, so if there's a different flavor you prefer, go for it. These are great for when you want to make a simple cake for someone you care about, or just because it's Wednesday. Versatility is key. Now, for the purposes of this video, I'm going to keep it simple and go with a standard 13 by 9 basic sheet cake, single layer with frosting. It's great for those times when you don't want to go to the bakery or your baked section of the supermarket. I mean, if we're being honest, the time and cost differences are marginal at best between making a cake and just buying one off the store. But when you make a cake, it's about the level of freshness that you want, as well as any modifications that you may have in mind. And if you're doing it for an anniversary, a birthday, or just because, this extra effort can show that you care. Otherwise, go to the store and buy it for pretty much $5, $10 and call it good. The stuff you will need. Starting off, we're going to need cake mix. I use a pre-mixed box cake because it's easier to have everything pre-measured than to have to store and manage all the different ingredients. Frosting, while optional, basically just sugar, it does give an extra sweet layer to the dessert. Measuring cup, for measuring. Shocker, I'm sure. Now, these following ingredients can vary depending on your recipe, so look at your box and make the adjustments. Starting with water. For the cakes, I needed 1 cup of water. Use what the box says, just in case it's different. Next up, vegetable oil. This is another one of those ingredients that your recipe may need a different amount. Here, I needed 1/3 of a cup, so that's what I went with. Eggs. This recipe calls for using 3, but, as I said for the prior 2 ingredients, your recipe may vary. Now, for things all of these cakes will need, a mixing bowl. A decent-sized bowl is recommended, something large enough to hold all the ingredients and will not send the batter flying when you start mixing it. A silicone flexible spatula. This is the type with the soft end so that you can scrape all the batter off of a bowl easy. These go for about $10 to $20, and they often come in a set. I find these very helpful when making any type of liquid batter. Cake pans. Here I'm using a 13 by 9 nonstick pan. Most box cakes will have a few options as far as what pans you can use, as well as what instructions to use based on nonstick versus aluminum, so just keep that in mind. A cooling rack. Optional. And to be honest, I didn't even know I had one until I actually made this cake. It helps cool the cake as the metal pan's going to be hot, and it can still cook it a little bit if you leave it in there. You can skip this if you'd rather just wait a little longer, or if you don't have one. A spatula, the non-flexible type. I use this to move the cake from the edges and lightly lift it when moving it to the cooling rack. An oven. Surprisingly, a required component to baking a cake. As with most of my cooking, I'll leave the rack at the second from the top setting just to keep the heat from scorching the bottom of the cake. Oven mitt and pot holders. Strangest thing. Once you put a metal pan in the hot box, even for a little bit, the damn thing will hurt to touch it, so you don't. Use the oven mitts and your hands will like you more. A timer. Cake is one of those desserts that ironically does not taste as good when it's well done or burnt or a charred mess. So, to prevent your cake from turning into a mess, you use a timer. And if you're lucky, you can have a delicious cake just like these. Now, let's get cooking. First, I'm going to preheat the oven based on the temperature that the box says to use, as well as for the specific cake pan, as well as the type of cake pan, non-stick versus aluminum, etc. Always go with what the box says. What can I say? Next, I'll take a mixing bowl, and I'm going to put in the cake mix powder. I'll measure out and get the wet ingredients ready. First, I'll add some water, as it's the simplest. Then I'll add some oil, and try and fail to keep it off of my hands. Then crack some eggs into a measuring cup. This limits how much trouble an eggshell piece can cause. It also allows me to scramble the eggs a little. I believe it helps mix the cake better, but it may be nothing. For the chocolate cake, I'm going to mix in a little bit of Hershey's Special Dark Syrup, just to give it a little extra flavor. Then I'm going to mix it up for a few minutes, making sure to scrape the silicone spatula against the walls to make sure I get in all the mix. Stir it well, scraping the bottom of the bowl. Basically, you do not want to leave any pockets of mix. As I've stirred these cakes before with plastic spoons and spatulas, the silicone flexible spatula makes it so much easier. I'll then use the cooking spray to grease the bottom of the pan and pour in the batter. This is going to be another one of those cases where the flexible spatula makes it a lot easier to get all the batter into your pan. Now, for the real shocker, we're going to put the cake pan in the oven. I bet you didn't see that one coming. We're going to place the cake pan in the center of the rack, making sure there's a good amount of space around all the sides. And this is the part where math comes into play. When I look at the box, there's a time for the cake pan. In this case, it says 28 minutes. But I never believe anything I read. So I'm going to take 10% off the top of that. So 28 becomes 25. I cut that in half, and I set the timer for 12.5 minutes. When it goes off, I'll turn the cake 180 degrees and set the timer for the other 12.5 minutes. Now, this is the part where you're going to check the cake to see how cooked it is. Normally, the boxes will say to use a wooden toothpick. I don't have any, so I use a butter knife instead. When you put it into the cake like this and it comes out coated in batter, then you know it's not ready. Then, in this example, when I put the knife in, it comes out clean, and that tells me that the cake is fully cooked. Of course, once the cake is fully cooked, we enter the torture part of the video, otherwise known as the waiting game. We'll let the cake sit in the pan for about 5 to 10 minutes. If you try to move it now, it's going to fall apart. After that, we're going to carefully flip it onto the cooling rack. If you're not going to frost the cake, you might want to use your spatula and carefully move it over to the cooling rack so that it's always facing up. As I will be frosting it, I don't care about the lines. I flip it like a hot cake. Literally. Because it's a cake with aggressive thermal properties. In other words, it's hot. Go with the pun. Now, to let the cake fully cool, I will give it about an hour. I would not put it in the refrigerator unless you have one specifically dedicated to baking. Otherwise, the heat could spoil the other food you have in there. Also, I would not cover the cake just yet. The heat could lead to water condensation. You know what really ruins a great cake? Yeah, watching the cake get rained on while it's sitting on top of your stove. If you're worried about dust, you can cover it with a piece of tin foil or prop the cover. Just don't trap the steam. After an hour, I put it back in the pan. And this is going to be one of those why are you making this cake type situations. For me, this cake is something that my wife and I will snack on over the next couple of days. We probably won't even finish it before it dries out. Unfortunate, but it happens. However, if I was making it to travel, then I'd probably do the same thing, putting it in the pan, frosting it, and using the lid. Now, once the cake is fully cooled, we're going to go to the part we all been waiting for. The let's add some more sugar. Yeah. This is where we open the frosting and drop big plops of it onto the cake. You spread it out as best possible. I tried a piping bag once, complete mess. Now, the butter knife is also a mess, but I have less to wash afterwards. You can put on how much frosting as you want. This is, I guess, where you have to decide how much you want to bounce off the walls. The average frosting container is a pre-designated portion of what some company thinks a 13 by 9 cake should have, but my taste buds, they were not consulted, so I will adjust the amount that I use. Then, once it's frosted to the way that I like, I'll put it in the fridge for about another hour. That's the frosting set. And about that point, take it out, cut it up, serve it, and enjoy it. And what do you know? Those are 2 delicious tasting cakes. And that looks like victory. For the record, professional cakes will often have the tops shaved flat and trimmed, which helps get the frosting that nice flat look. They would also be frosted on a turntable instead of the pan. But these are just a few things to consider depending on how fancy you want to make the cake look. And while I am sure we will revisit cakes in the future, until then, remember to cook the easy way. If you find this video entertaining, then like, share, and subscribe.
Everything I've worked for is resting on this moment. Don't know what I love more, the fight or the focus. I'm always in the shadows, hardly know that I exist. Think you're the best, but get ready for the plot twist. Watch this!